My son actually went missing a few months ago, and it was probably the scariest time of my life. A lot happened that I am struggling with, but I will try and do my best to explain. I think my son went missing for around 24 hours, and my wife and I were scared half to death. Well, not exactly 24 hours, but close enough. It was the weekend, and he was desperate to go and stay at his friend's house, Darren. I knew his father pretty well, and I called him up just to check and see if it was okay with him, and, to make sure that they were not trying to pull a fast one so that they could go and hang out in the woods or something dangerous. My boy was only around 12 years old at this time, but still, as a father, you always worry. It's not something that you can just switch off. I let my son leave, and he did not take much with him aside from a cheap shitty phone that I could contact him on if I needed him to come home or so I could just check up on him. Anyway, so it got to around 9 p.m. and I gave my son a call just to say goodnight to him. Call it what you want, but I always did this, no matter what. The phone rang and eventually it just went to voicemail, so I tried to call one more time. This time though, the phone did not ring. It gave me that pre-recorded message about the number no longer being in service. That was absolutely impossible. I paid for that phone. There was no way for him to have done that, especially not in the time between those two calls. I was starting to panic now, so I called up Darren's father, and it sounded like I roused him awake from a deep sleep. He asked me what was up, and I told him that I was just checking in and making sure that my son was okay, since, he did not pick up like he usually would. I asked if he maybe misplaced his phone or even damaged it. Darren's father suddenly sounded really concerned. His tone changed in an instant. He went from sounding half asleep to sounding like he'd just been splashed awake by an ice-cold bucket of water. And he said to me in a really worried tone, "Your son isn't here. He never came. Darren tried to call him, but he never answered, so we figured he either got grounded or he did not want to come and stay here anymore." I didn't even give him the courtesy of saying goodbye. I hung up immediately and was on the phone to the police in seconds. They gave me that bullshit spiel about how kids his age are always running away and to give it time and that he would turn up eventually. They kept going on at me about searching his favorite places and whatnot, and I just started screaming at them that they better get someone out there immediately to find him. My wife was sobbing, and I admit, I made the situation a lot worse with my reaction. I grabbed my coat and told her to stay by the phone. I went out looking for my son with just a flashlight. I spent hours looking for him. I mainly searched the nearby woods since I had banned him from there before, and it was his favorite place to sneak off. It was only when I finally returned to the house that I finally found him. He was about 5 minutes away down the street, just standing on the pavement and staring up at a house window, a random house. He was standing there, but he was not wearing the same clothes as before that he left in earlier that day. The clothes he was wearing, I hadn't ever seen them before. I had no idea where he could have gotten them from. And he looked drenched too. Not his clothes were bone dry, but like his hair and his forehead looked like he'd taken a dip in the pool and forgotten to dry off. I shouted out his name and I ran for him and I placed my hand on his shoulder. He went from staring off into space in a daze to flipping around and starting to try and bat my hand away. He felt cold, really cold. His skin felt like ice to the touch. I told him it was me and that he was safe now, that he was okay, but he just gave me a dead-eyed stare. I asked him what he was doing outside here, and he told me, "I'm going home." I told him that this was not our home and that he was at the wrong house, and he just said, "Oh." That was it. Gone for that long, and that was all he could say. I was already so stressed at my job, I did not need all of this. I work as a lawyer, by the way, and at the time I was covering a big case, against a government-run company. I can't say any more, even now. It would screw me over big time. I brought my son into the house, and my wife hugged him to death, but he just wasn't really interested. He didn't look scared or sad, or even happy to see us. He just looked uninterested. He actually asked me if he could go up to his room. I asked him if something bad happened. I told him that he would not be in any trouble, and that we just wanted him to be safe, but he was not really interested in talking. So I got mad, really mad. I asked him why he had not gone to Darren's house, and why he ran off and scared us half to death like that. He just shrugged his shoulders at me and did not really have an answer. Halfway through shouting at him, I got a really strong whiff of something. This really strong, pungent smell. He smelled like oil or something, like straight out of a car. It was just suddenly overpowering once my nose took notice of it, whereas before, I did not notice it at all, but now I couldn't stop smelling it. I told my son that he was grounded until further notice and to go to his room. My son, he stood up. Then he stood there for a second and kind of hesitated for a moment. He started moving towards the stairs and then turned back and asked me which room was his. I told him to stop fucking around, and he turned his head to the side like a dog would, and he just kept staring at me with that same blank expression. After around a minute of silence, he just trudged up the stairs, but he walked so weirdly. At the time, I thought that maybe he'd injured himself in the woods or something and tripped and sprained an ankle, because he could not walk 1 foot in front of the other like a normal human being. He was clinging pretty tightly to the handrail with both hands and was walking in stages, really. He would lift his foot up high into the air, and only once it was fully raised would he bend it more and then move it forward. They were all individual movements and not fluid at all. I figured that he either hurt himself or was testing my patience because he was mad at being grounded. You know how unruly kids can get at that age. I thought he was just being a smartass. Fast forward to later that night, maybe around midnight I think. I caught him watching me, or it looked like he was watching me anyway. My wife and I barely even talked. We were both just exhausted. I ended up hearing something that roused me awake. It's really hard to describe in retrospect. It was like some kind of a beeping or a clicking sound, a really metallic beeping. You know in those really old movies where they'd have like a countdown at the start from 10, and every time the number changed, there would be that little bleep sound. That's about the only thing I can really compare it to, but even then, it doesn't really come close. At first, I thought it was a leftover part of my dream, because I guess that sound started happening in my dream too, since I was hearing it so much. But I realized very quickly I could actually hear it, and it was coming from the doorway. And in the doorway, there was my son. He was laid almost prone, but he was using his hands to lift his chest off of the ground, and he was jutting it out forwards, in just about the oddest position I've ever seen someone in. He was not struggling to hold his own weight up or anything, which was surprising, since he wasn't really a strong kid, and not exactly skinny either. But the weirdest part was that his eyes were flashing. I swear that is what I saw. I saw his 2 eyes looking up at me, staring directly at me, and they were just flashing on and off every so often, basically in time with that noise. They were flashing a red kind of color, and it looked exactly like the kind of light that would come from a TV when it's on standby, but it was blinking. I was just staring in disbelief for a few seconds, and then I called out and I said, "Mikey?" while I was still pretty much half asleep. Dead fucking silence after that. The flashing stopped, the beeping stopped, and then out of nowhere, I just hear this rapid tap 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 like something scuttling across the wooden floor really quickly. I got up and out of my bed, and I went into my son's room. I got to the door, which was wide open. Mikey hates having his door open when he's asleep because he's paranoid about someone walking in and getting him, as he used to like to put it. It's something that he still had not grown out of, so that was the first red flag for me. Mikey was laying in the bed on his back, but his cover was on the floor and not over himself. I walked over to him and I stood there for a few seconds because I wanted to see how long it would take for him to notice me. It's kind of weird, and I know you will call me a moron for not piecing things together sooner, but his eyes they looked like they were rolled back into his head. When you lose your son and get him back like that, all you really care about is him being okay, not trying to piece together elaborate theories in your head or trying to look for the weirdness. But anyway, I got tired of waiting and I said, "I know you're not asleep." And he responded in about 2 seconds flat, without even unrolling his eyes, and it made me shit my pants. He just said to me, "Well, it gave it away," in this really flat, almost uninterested tone. I told him to sit up in his bed properly and stop screwing around and to just sit there and listen to me. I grabbed his covers off of the floor and I tucked him into bed, and I did my best to try and have a really honest father-to-son conversation. I found in the past that even though he was still young, that treating him like an adult went a long way, and he was a lot more receptive to that kind of approach. I told him that I was not mad anymore, that I just wanted to know that he was okay. He did not say a word and was just looking directly into my eyes, so I asked him what happened. He seemed to be lost in thought for a while. He started looking around the room, tilting his head from side to side. Then it seemed like something lit up in his eyes for just a second. He was looking out at the window, and then he turned back to me and was just talking at 1,000,000 miles a minute. I had to actually get him to slow down. He was telling me about how he wanted to go into the woods at night and relax. He told me that was why. He told me he was sorry and would not do it ever again. I asked him why he would do that, and again, he seemed stunned. He just told me that he wanted to. And then he told me, "It's just like you and Mama said. I just wanted to go into the woods." What the fuck? When he said this, I tried to hide it, but I felt chills going up my spine. There was no way he could have known that we said that. We only said that to each other while he was still missing. I just told him goodnight, and then I left him there. I told him not to get out of bed again. I woke up in a fright to my alarm the next morning. I was going to be late for work, and I had not heard Mikey leave for school, and so I was in a mixture of panic and anger. He was laying in his bed, staring at the ceiling, and I asked him why the hell he was not up yet. And he just looked at me and said, "You told me I wasn't allowed to get out of bed again." I dragged him out of bed by his ear, and I made him get dressed, and then I drove him there myself. I didn't even give him time to pack a lunch. I just tossed him some money so that he could get something later. My son usually gets home from school before both me and my wife. When I got back, I found that the front door had been left wide open. The house was a complete wreck. For a second, I was worried that someone had broken into our house and robbed us, but it was my son. There were documents spread out all over the table. My passport was there as well as a few things from my room. Documents relating to my work. Documents that no one else is meant to see due to confidentiality and that could get me into real trouble. Drawers in the living room had been pulled open. It looked as if every single utensil had been ripped out from the kitchen and piled onto the table. Even things not relating to my work had been piled up and ripped out, and yeah, I eventually found my son in my room with bits of papers and letters all spread out onto the bed like they were pieces to a jigsaw puzzle. I could see that in the corner of my room, my paper shredder, the lid had been pulled off of it and it had been tipped onto the floor, but I had already emptied it just a few days ago. I made my son jump by shouting at him and asking what the hell he was doing. I guess I could have imagined this, but when he jumped out of his skin and turned and looked at me, I could have sworn that I saw a flash or something. Like a flash coming from him, a white flash. Not enough to be blinding and take over my whole vision, but enough that I saw it. I screamed at him about how he knew not to mess with shit from my work and how I could lose my job, but he just seemed so unfazed. I shouted at him again and again, asking him what he was doing, trying to drill it into his skull that this was not okay. And he just started crying. It was weird because he stared at me for a few seconds with a blank look on his face, and then after a few seconds, he just started full on sobbing. I'm talking deep breaths where it sounded like he couldn't breathe, snot falling out of his nose, all at the same time. In between those deep and almost panicked breaths, he was telling me that he was sorry, that he was just interested. He had never been interested in my job before in his entire life. I could not even be bothered to listen to him anymore. I told him to go to his room and that he could stay there all night. And just like that, he stopped crying and he just went. He just walked to his room while wiping the tears away from his face in silence. I was at a loss for words and what to do. Life carried on as usual after that. I wouldn't say that it was normal per se, but the weirdness from Mikey was becoming less and less. He seemed to be acting more and more like himself again. It seemed like the worst of it was over. But he was asking me more about work, and I would tell him bits and pieces that I could, but nothing that could get me into trouble. I asked him if he'd been thinking about wanting to become a lawyer, and he told me no. He told me that he would be too scared of the criminals. It seemed like a bit of an odd thing to say, but hey, kids are weird and blunt like that. He seemed to be having fun at least, and we were back to our usual father-son bonding. He didn't seem interested in hanging out with his friends much though. I told him that he should go and stay with Darren and have fun, but he told me, "I'd much rather hang out with you, Papa. You're more fun." It made me smile, actually. I really enjoyed our time together. Things did not stay like this for long, unfortunately. I was pretty pissed off the day that this happened, because there was this stupid van that had been parked outside on the street for a few days now and was taking up all of the space to park. I tried to wait around and see if the owner came back, but it never happened. It was just a random white van with no markings at all. I got a phone call from Mikey's principal at around lunchtime, and he was asking me very politely if I could come in for a sit down and a chat. Even before they told me the reason why, I was already apologizing for Mikey's behavior and asking what he had done and reassuring the principal that he was not a bad kid, that he was just in a bad way. But the principal told me to calm down and that Mikey had not done anything wrong. He just needed to speak to me about a concern that they had. I didn't really have the time, but I couldn't exactly ignore something like this. When I got there, both the principal and Mikey's English teacher were sitting there. Mikey was still in his final class for the day, so he was not there. Mikey's English teacher told me something very odd. Apparently, at the end of the school day, when all of the kids all go and walk home, she saw Mikey acting very strangely. Apparently, he seemed to be waiting around for quite a while, not far away from the school. Eventually, she said that this car pulled up, like a big, all-black Land Rover. She told me that Mikey actually went up to the car and knocked on the window without being prompted at all, and whoever was inside the car rolled the window down. She told me that whoever it was, she could not really make out his face, that he seemed to be wearing some kind of a suit, a really expensive, professional-looking one, and he was wearing these big rounded glasses that covered up a lot of his face. Supposedly, they were sunglasses or something, because they were really dim. She said that she watched for a while, and it seemed like they were talking about something, but obviously, she had no idea what they were talking about. And then, she saw the back door being opened up from the inside, but she did not see anyone open it. She never saw that man lean back and open the door, so she said it seemed like there was another person inside. Mikey apparently climbed straight into the vehicle without any prompting or asking. And then around 2 minutes later, Mikey just hopped back out of the vehicle, just the exact same, completely safe from harm, and then he just walked home like he would usually do. It was probably the oddest thing I had ever been told about my son. I thanked her for telling me and for looking out for him. I asked if she knew anything else about the man or the men, but she said no. She'd noted down the license plate and filed a report, as she's obviously obligated to do, due to it being a safeguarding issue, but nothing had come of it so far. I told them that I would talk to Mikey and get to the bottom of everything. He got home way later than he should have done that day. I didn't want to linger at the school and give him a ride home, because then he would know that something was up, and I did not want him to be on the defensive. If something was going on with him, then I was going to need him to trust me enough to open up so I could help him deal with those bastards. I sat him down when he got home, and I asked him about what his teacher saw. He vehemently denied everything that she said. He tried to tell me that she must have mistaken another kid for him, that he would never talk to a stranger like that, etc. He then asked me which teacher told me. He was really adamant about finding out. I told him that it did not matter, and he started getting really worked up, saying, "Which fucking idiot told you that, huh? Which stupid teacher is telling you lies?" I just sent him up to his room. I couldn't deal with it. It was all too much, too soon. Fast forward around a week later, and then everything just went wrong. I can't remember much of what happened that day until that night. My son had been pretty quiet and stayed in his room for much of the day. He had been doing this for the last few days, actually. It got to around 10 p.m., and my wife and I were heading to bed, so I tried to check on him. He'd gone back to being really weird and not really his usual self after that outburst about the teacher. I was really worried about the setback after he'd been doing so well. I was terrified that someone was hurting him, and he was either too scared to tell me, or even worse, that he thought he was okay and had it all under control. I felt powerless and almost like the worst parent in the entire world. When I went into his room to see how he was doing, I caught him trying to leave the house. The only window that opens in his room is the top one, and it does not go the whole way. It opens up about halfway, so there was not a lot of space in the gap. My son, he had fucking contorted himself in the oddest fashion possible, and had managed to fit about half of his body through this gap, and only his legs were still dangling into the room. It should have been impossible for him to do, for him to fit in that way. I ran over to him and started grabbing him by the legs, and I started trying to pull him back in, and I asked him what the hell he was doing. He started kicking his legs backwards at me to stop me. He was yelling at me to leave him alone. He kicked one of his legs backwards and he caught me in the shoulder. It hurt really badly. I felt something in my shoulder click when he made contact, and I felt this shooting pain for a few seconds. I don't know what it was, but my son just felt stronger than before, unnaturally strong. I could not pry him away and back into the house, and it wasn't because he was stuck either. He was resisting me, and he kicked me way harder than he should have been able to. I was shouting for my wife to come and help me, but she was no use, and it was not long before Mikey managed to squeeze himself out of the window. With no hesitation at all, he just dropped down all the way. It was a decently sized drop too, enough to cause real damage to your legs if you're not careful and if you land the wrong way. But within seconds, I could see my son sprinting in the direction of the woods. I ran as quickly as I could down the stairs, but before I even got to the front door, I could hear a sound coming from the open window behind me. It sounded like tires screeching pretty aggressively on concrete. I yanked the front door open, and I ran and I ran. I'd lost sight of Mikey by that point, but I did my best to try and find him. I ran around in those woods for around 20 minutes before I found anything at all. I just saw a patch of hair at first. It looked like Mikey was face down in the dirt in the woods, and I started tearing up before I even got there. I knew something was wrong. I got up to him, and I rolled him over, and something was incredibly wrong with Mikey. He wasn't breathing. His eyes were blank. In his body, it wasn't all there. It wasn't all attached. Please bear with me, because I know how this sounds, but his body was destroyed. His arms were not attached to the body anymore, but it wasn't like there were cuts or anything. It was like they were just ripped off with pure force. They were removed from him and away from his sides, and it looked like someone had taken a hammer and tried to smash them to bits. Only, they weren't human bits. There were no human bits there. It was like bits of metal, bits of plastic that had shot off from the impact. There was something leaking out of his body, out of his head especially. It was just this pure black substance, and I got that overpowering stench of oil in my nostrils once again. There was something coming out of him, out of the bits of his body that were not attached anymore, like the arms. I could see inside them where they were smashed, and there were these bits of thick tubing, and there was like wires inside. I am not fucking kidding you. These thick, coiled wires running inside the tubing and all along the arm. The body was all broken and smashed into pieces. Half of the face was barely recognizable and was crumbling into tiny bits of metal and plastic. The skin on the face, well, it didn't look like skin anymore. It looked more of a silver color and was glossy. I only recognized it as Mikey because of the clothes. It looked like someone had tried to dispose of something. I was crying because, well, I guess I could not comprehend what I was looking at right in front of me. It looked Mikey enough that my brain thought my son was dead and dismembered right in front of me. I remember that while I was crying and putting my head down onto his chest, I felt this vibrating sensation. There was something hanging out of where his throat used to be. It was black, and it was blinking red every so often. I didn't even call the police. I felt dazed and broken, and so I trudged all the way back to my house. When I got back there, my wife asked me what happened and why I had gone so crazy. I asked her what she meant. She told me that from the way I was screaming, she was sure that something had happened to Mikey, that he had left or done something wrong. I told her that something had. I was preparing for the worst. I told her to sit down and brace herself so that I could tell her what I had seen. Before I could even tell her though, she kept on talking, telling me that I scared the poor boy half to death, that he was sleeping in our bed right now because he was too scared to sleep in his own room. I froze and was like, Mikey is in our bed right now? She told me he was. I don't want to make this too much longer, but Mikey was there, in our bed, safe and sound. He was scared, but he was safe. He was normal, aside from the fact that he had no idea what I was talking about when I would refer to anything from the last few weeks. I did not bother to press him too hard on things. I didn't even really know what was going on myself. My wife apparently found him. She said she found him at the door, just kinda waiting there. She said she heard those tires screech, but like a second time after I had already left, and she saw Mikey there. He seemed really dazed and confused and scared out of his mind, so she took him upstairs. She told me it looked like he ran down the stairs after me, and she thought I had just lost my mind. My wife just thought that I had lost it and was quite concerned for a while, and that did not get any better when that court case I was involved in went up in smoke. I can't really divulge much, but let's just say that things went very wrong for me very quickly, and I was accused by my client of sharing information that was told to me in confidence. It still is not over, so I can't really say any more, but the outcome does not look positive for me. I wish that I knew more about what happened with my son. These days, I just try to pretend it was all a dream and that nothing happened. I know it's probably not healthy, but it's the only way I can really get by. I forgot to mention, but I tried going back into those woods again, not long after everything happened. There was not a single trace left there of that thing anymore.